If you spend as much time cruising up and down the highways of LeftTube as much as I do, you may have heard the term patriarchy being bandied about quite a bit.
Historically, the nature of patriarchy has mostly excluded black men in a traditional sense.
In this trajectory, it would be easy to think that men are killing the planet. These powerful men have the capability to save the world, but instead are letting it die. But it's not so simple. To understand the role of gender in the climate crisis, we need to disentangle individual men from patriarchy and masculinity.
I feel that for a while we've just kind of thrown the words toxic masculinity around without understanding that it's actually a symptom of a much larger disease known as patriarchy.
The emergence of fascist groups was deeply connected to not only reactionism and social hierarchy in general, but to patriarchy specifically.
You may also hear the term being tossed around on the occasional Manosphere video. But what exactly is patriarchy? Does patriarchy just mean men are bad? Does it mean men control women? Or does patriarchy just mean that men run the world? Well, today, instead of just mentioning patriarchy and not explaining what it is, the entire point of this video is obviously to explore this topic that is often referenced and rarely explained in detail. But before I get too far into it, today's video is brought to you by Patriarchy Inc. I'm not only a client, I'm the Patriarch President. Okay, that's enough stalling. For a brief definition, patriarchy can be defined as a social system in which men hold primary power and dominance over women in various aspects of society. This includes political, economic, and social spheres. It involves a hierarchical structure where men typically occupy positions of authority and privilege, while women are often relegated to subordinate roles. Though matriarchal cultures and societies have existed throughout history, they are rare. A few prominent examples include the Akan of Ghana, the Khasi of India, the Tuareg of North Africa, and the Hopi tribe. Because there have been so many different societies and cultures across human history, acknowledging the so-called beginning of patriarchy is pretty much an impossible task. There was no meeting of malicious men in a room who sat and drafted the rules of patriarchy. Some evidence suggests that early hunter-gatherer societies were relatively egalitarian. However, as humanity shifted towards agriculture and more complex societies developed, things like owning property and inheritance became significant parts of our lives. This shift led to the consolidation of power among men who often controlled resources and property, whilst women's roles were confined to domestic and reproductive activities. This is not meant to imply that patriarchy is a modern phenomenon though. As an example, both ancient Greece and Rome were very famously patriarchal societies. Men held political power and women's rights were limited, with their primary roles often centered around taking care of the household and child rearing. For much of the Middle Ages, otherwise known as the medieval period, Christianity played a significant role in shaping patriarchal norms. Traditional gender norms were enforced via the church, which emphasized submitting to men. With the medieval period also came the emergence of feudal societies, where once again land ownership and inheritance were critical factors in perpetuating male dominance. As we got into the 18th and 19th centuries, there were arguably significant social changes brought out via the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, contributing to advances in human rights and gender equality. In spite of this though, patriarchal norms were largely maintained. The Industrial Revolution in particular led to a division of labor along gender lines, with men typically working in factories or offices, and women expected to perform unpaid domestic labor. The turn of the 20th century saw the rise of the feminist movement, a pivotal moment in history that challenged and sought to deconstruct patriarchal structures. Women's suffrage, reproductive rights, and increased participation in the workforce were key milestones in the fight for gender equality. Despite those instrumental victories and the strides that women continue to make to this day in terms of political leadership, education, and reducing workplace bias to some degree, we still live in a society that struggles to rid itself of its deep patriarchal roots. Perhaps the most glaring example of this is the recent Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade here in the US. The fact that women's reproductive rights are even a topic of debate at all, frankly, almost defies belief. There is not a single male-specific issue that gets nearly that much attention. Much like systemic racism, the initial seeds of patriarchy, though planted ages ago, is still affecting society in tangible ways to this day. And though I did touch on some of the more obvious historical impacts of patriarchy already, let's take a look at some more subtle but still very real impacts of patriarchy on society today. The gender pay gap. Though many try to dismiss the gender pay gap as merely the result of women simply choosing lower paying careers, the data suggests that there is clearly more at play than gendered career choices. The gender pay gap is a direct reflection on patriarchal structures that undervalue women's labor and limit their access to high-paying positions and career advancement opportunities. Underrepresentation in leadership. Women are frequently underrepresented in leadership positions in politics, business, academia, and other areas. This underrepresentation can be attributed in no small part to entrenched patriarchal norms that have historically excluded women from positions of power and decision-making. Gender-based violence. Patriarchy contributes to the persistence of gender-based violence, including domestic violence, sexual harassment, and human trafficking. These forms of violence are often rooted in the belief that men have the right to control and dominate women. Stereotypes and gender roles. Traditional gender roles and stereotypes continue to shape societal expectations. These roles often place the burden of caregiving and domestic work on women, limiting their opportunities for personal and professional development. Reproductive rights. Debates over reproductive rights, including access to contraception and abortion, highlight the ongoing influence of patriarchal ideologies in controlling women's bodies and choices. These debates often involve attempts to restrict women's autonomy. Media and popular culture. The media often perpetuates harmful gender stereotypes and objectification of women, reinforcing traditional ideas about masculinity and femininity. These portrayals can have a significant impact on people's perceptions and attitudes. Intersectionality. It's essential to recognize that the effects of patriarchy intersect with other forms of discrimination, such as racism, classism, and ableism. Women who belong to marginalized groups often face compounded disadvantages due to these intersecting factors. Political and legal challenges. Efforts to address gender inequality and dismantle patriarchal structures can face resistance from conservative political and religious groups, which may seek to maintain traditional gender roles and restrictions on women's rights. Online harassment. The rise of the internet and social media has also exposed women to online harassment and cyberbullying, often driven by misogynistic attitudes and the desire to silence women's voices. Education. Gender bias can persist in educational settings, affecting the opportunities and outcomes for girls and women in STEM fields and other disciplines. Despite the focus on how patriarchy has historically harmed women, make no mistake, patriarchy harms men as well. So, though men are the primary beneficiaries of patriarchy to be sure, let's consider some of the ways that patriarchy can be detrimental to men as well. Emotional expression. Patriarchy often enforces traditional notions of masculinity, which discourage men from expressing a wide range of emotions. Men may feel pressure to conform to stoic and emotionally reserved behaviors, leading to emotional repression and a limited ability to communicate their feelings and vulnerability. Mental health. The societal pressure on men to conform to rigid masculine ideals can contribute to mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and stress. Men may avoid seeking help or talking about their mental health struggles due to fear of appearing weak or vulnerable. Relationships. Patriarchy can negatively affect men's relationships by promoting power imbalances and unhealthy dynamics. Traditional gender roles can create unrealistic expectations about what it means to be a partner or a father, leading to difficulties in building and maintaining healthy relationships. Limited career choices. While men may have more access to leadership positions and higher paying jobs, they can also be pressured to pursue certain career paths based on societal expectations of success. This pressure may limit their career choices and prevent them from pursuing their true passions. Violence and aggression. Patriarchal norms that equate masculinity with dominance and control can contribute to violence and aggression among men. The idea that real men should be tough and assertive can lead to confrontational and aggressive behavior. Fatherhood expectations. Patriarchy often places significant expectations on men as fathers, emphasizing their role as providers and disciplinarians. This can create stress and feelings of inadequacy for men who may want to be more involved in caregiving or who don't conform to traditional fatherhood roles. Pressure to suppress individuality. Men may face pressure to conform to a narrow definition of masculinity, which can discourage them from exploring their own unique interests and identities. This suppression of individuality can hinder personal growth and self-discovery. Lack of emotional support. Men may have limited access to emotional support networks because societal norms discourage close male friendships and emotional intimacy. This can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness. Harmful masculinity norms. Patriarchy can perpetuate harmful forms of masculinity, such as toxic masculinity, which glorify traits like aggression, dominance, and sexual conquest. These norms can lead to unhealthy competition among men and contribute to misogyny and sexism. Inequality within patriarchy. Not all men benefit equally from patriarchal systems. Men who do not fit the traditional mold of masculinity, such as LGBTQ+ men or men from marginalized communities, may face discrimination and prejudice both within and outside patriarchal structures. Make no mistake, while it is important to point out the ways in which patriarchy can be harmful to men, the harm is not equitably distributed across genders. Patriarchy primarily perpetuates inequalities based on gender, disproportionately affecting women and non-binary individuals. And just like men can at times be harmed by patriarchy, despite being the primary beneficiaries of it, likewise, women can at times help perpetuate patriarchy, despite being the ones that are normally harmed the most by it. Let's quickly explore some ways women can help perpetuate the spread of patriarchy. Gender socialization. From a young age, children are socialized into traditional gender roles. Parents, caregivers, and teachers often reinforce these roles by encouraging certain behaviors and discouraging others based on gender. For example, girls may be told to be nurturing and boys to be tough. This socialization can reinforce traditional gender norms and expectations. Gender stereotypes. People may unconsciously hold and perpetuate gender stereotypes, which can limit individuals' choices and opportunities. For instance, assuming that women are naturally better caregivers or that men are inherently more assertive can lead to biased decision-making in both personal and professional settings. Unequal division of labor. In many households, women still shoulder the majority of domestic and caregiving responsibilities, even when both partners work outside the home. This unequal division of labor is often perpetuated by societal expectations and traditional gender roles, even when both partners may wish for a more equitable arrangement. Language and communication. The language we use can reflect and perpetuate gender inequalities. Common expressions and sayings may reinforce gender stereotypes or dismiss the experiences of women or non-binary individuals. For example, using phrases like man up or throw like a girl can reinforce traditional gender norms. Media and entertainment. Media representations can reinforce gender stereotypes and objectify women. Men and women may consume media that portrays gender roles and norms without critically examining their impact on society. Beauty standards. Both men and women can contribute to the perpetuation of unrealistic beauty standards by buying into or promoting products and ideals that emphasize physical appearance over other qualities. This can contribute to body image issues and the objectification of individuals. Sexualization and objectification. People of all genders can participate in the sexualization and objectification of women's bodies, whether through everyday comments, attitudes, or actions. This contributes to the devaluation of women based on their physical appearance. Workplace dynamics. In professional settings, individuals may unknowingly contribute to gender discrimination by failing to challenge or address biased practices or behaviors. Men and women alike may inadvertently perpetuate stereotypes about leadership or competence. Political and cultural norms. Both men and women can vote for or support policies and politicians who perpetuate patriarchal norms and traditional gender roles. This can affect issues like reproductive rights, gender-based violence, and pay equity. Silencing dissent. People may silence or dismiss individuals who challenge patriarchal norms or call out sexist behaviors. This can discourage open dialogue and perpetuate the status quo. Okay, so we explored the roots of patriarchy and how we got here. So now what? Do we just eternally shrug and acknowledge that patriarchy is real? Are we too far gone as a society to topple the far-reaching consequences of patriarchy? Hopefully not. On an individual level, there are steps we can all take to ensure we are doing our part to topple the patriarchal structure of our society. You can educate yourself. While this video is a very basic starting point, you can always dive deeper into the history and manifestations of patriarchy. Take the time to understand how it affects individuals, families, and societies. Perhaps do some reading and engage with diverse perspectives to gain a comprehensive understanding of gender issues. Challenge gender stereotypes. Actively challenge and confront gender stereotypes, both in your own thinking and in conversations with others. Question assumptions about what it means to be a man or woman, and encourage others to do the same. Promote inclusivity. Create inclusive spaces where all genders are welcome and respected. Encourage open dialogue about gender issues and provide a platform for marginalized voices to be heard. Support gender equality initiatives. Volunteer, donate, or participate in organizations and initiatives that promote gender equality. This could include local women's shelters, feminist advocacy groups, or organizations working on policy changes. Be mindful of language. Pay attention to the language you use and how it may reinforce patriarchal norms. Avoid derogatory or sexist language, and choose words that promote respect and equality. Challenge discrimination. If you witness or experience gender-based discrimination or harassment, speak up and take action. Support others who may be facing such challenges and ensure that their voices are heard. Of course, this wouldn't be a leftist channel if we didn't confront the reality that individual changes can only go so far. Patriarchy is so deeply entrenched in our society and culture that we must ultimately look to societal and systemic level changes in order to see a real change if we are to topple patriarchy. And some of the ways that we can systemically accomplish this would be with legal reforms. Advocate for legal reforms that address gender-based discrimination and violence. Support policies that promote equal pay, access to reproductive health care, and protection against gender-based violence. Equal representation. Push for greater representation of women in marginalized genders in leadership roles in government, business, and other sectors. Encourage electoral and corporate diversity. Education reform. Promote comprehensive and inclusive sex education programs that teach consent, respect, and healthy relationships. Challenge the perpetuation of gender stereotypes in educational materials. Parental leave policies. Advocate for equitable parental leave policies that allow both parents to share caregiving responsibilities. This helps combat the traditional gender roles that often limit women's career opportunities. Economic empowerment. Support economic empowerment initiatives for women and marginalized genders, including access to education, training, and resources to start and grow businesses. Media and entertainment. Encourage media outlets to portray diverse and empowering representations of women and non-binary individuals. Hold media accountable for perpetuating harmful stereotypes. Community engagement. Build strong communities that prioritize gender equality. Encourage local organizations and governments to take action against gender-based violence and discrimination. Institutional change. Challenge patriarchal norms within institutions like religious organizations and cultural traditions. Encourage these institutions to reevaluate their practices and adapt to more inclusive values. At the end of the day, it's going to take a lot more than petty Twitter beefs and internet squabbles to squash patriarchy. Patriarchy is far greater than most of the insignificant, petty culture war issues that we tend to argue about on the internet. And because patriarchy harms both men and women, and because we are all people regardless of our gender, we should all be equally invested in toppling patriarchy. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. All of the engagement helps. And if you want to support, patreon.com/progressivewriter. I do have 2 Patreon exclusive videos on Patreon already right now. Thank you again.